Good morning. We're going to call the meeting to order. Thank you and welcome. I'll begin with a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of March 8th, 2023.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you. I'll ask Curtis for the executive director's report and his remarks.
Terrific. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, visitors, port employees. Really great to see everyone here this morning. I want to start by welcoming new employees who are tracking us on YouTube. Commission officers and the executive team just met with them, and that's just a great new crop of port employees who are engaged from all over the economic spectrum. Just a really terrific bunch. So welcome, team. Really good to see you this morning. I would also like to acknowledge our safety champions, hopefully up here on the screen, Andrew, Chad, Mindy, and Walt. Just two in particular, we did talk this morning with new employees about if you see something, say something. If you see something that's not safe, stop. Say something and we can get it taken care of. A couple examples here, both Mindy and Andrew saying something about something they saw and it enabled the team to get to work on it. Just want to shout out great port employees trying to keep our space safe for ourselves, for our coworkers, for our visitors. So just a great crew. Also a short shout out to Walt Marchbanks, who, as he oftentimes is in the airport talking to people and keeping safety at the top of his list. My kids and I and spouse were in Los Angeles this week. We went to Disneyland. It was not nearly as bad as I thought it was. And on our, as it would be, as we were leaving town, Walt was there with a stuffed taco on his head. And my kids thought he was pretty cool. You know, people like this work at the Port of Portland, it's like they do. So thank you, safety champions. This morning, Dan Pippinger, are you ready with a safety message?
I am, Curtis.
No stuffed taco.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm Dan Pippinger. I use the pronouns he and him, and I'm the Port's Chief Operating Officer. I'm accountable for the occupational safe and health at our marine and aviation facilities and with our teams that work there. For today's message, I'd like to highlight recent employee safety and health accomplishment. Most of the organization was recognized last month at the Governor's Occupational Safety and Health Conference, where we received an award recognizing our leading workplace safety program. I accepted the award from Renee Stapleton, the Oregon OSHA administrator, on behalf of our employees. And you can see a picture of some of the team here on the screen. The award was a real validation and verification of the Port's efforts in employee safety and health. We celebrated the achievement as we acknowledged we still have work to do on our journey to zero injuries and continued operational excellence. Our employees are maturing through a multitude of tasks or mitigating a multitude of tasks every day in the process of doing their jobs. And I commend the maturing safe work culture our employees have built and enjoy, and reiterate my commitment to this work through committed and visible leadership and engaged employee involvement. I will also continue to drive accountability to integrate our safety management system processes while monitoring the leading indicators on what we call shameless incident reporting and analysis. Just looking at the facts for prescribing corrective actions and getting that information. Hazard reporting to make sure we're ensuring abatement and learning, and tracking corrective action plans to make sure we close safety issues and incidents. All of this serves to elevate and continuously improve our employee safety and health. For the past 12 months, employees in the port operations have performed their work at 98% safe over 1 million labor hours. In fact, the entire Port of Portland enterprise has. However, 98% is not good enough. I continue to be engaged with my leadership team and safety staff to support and enable successful completion of the fiscal year 23 safety plans. And advancing the awareness of safety is not just the absence of injuries. Safety is the presence of resilient defenses, and our journey to 100% safety continues. Thank you, Commission.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. And the focus on safety in our operations. Just a couple things for you this morning, Commissioners. First, the governor will sign tomorrow, Keith, is that right? The advanced manufacturing legislation that Keith and his team were active participants in. I was lucky enough to also get to participate in that Semiconductor Competitiveness Task Force, Senate Bill 4. Its passage includes $210 million that will go to help access the CHIPS Act opportunity at a federal level. I was lucky enough last week to spend some time with Commerce Secretary Raimondo and our U.S. Senator Ron Wyden and Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, essentially elevating the significance of economic development across the region that we can access through semiconductor growth and activity. So really excited about that opportunity. And then finally, just a few new options for travelers and employees at PDX. I actually just traded messages this morning with Patrick Kreitzer from Tillamook Creamery, a new play area in Concourse E, sponsored by Tillamook. It looks terrific. I was out there yesterday and the kids are all over it. It's really great. 600 square foot play area, opened last month. The space includes bouncy flooring made from post-consumer recycled materials and a great mural created by illustrator Josephine Rice. So it just is really great, right across from Bambuza. It's really terrific. Finally, an issue we've talked about here at Commission, we opened an employee-only interfaith prayer room recently, pre-security on the north side of PDX. Really excited about creating another opportunity for employees and visitors to have a space for both a prayer room, but also quiet reflection. So really excited about that opportunity. And those are my comments this morning, Madam President.
Thanks, Curtis, and congratulations to you and the team for the safety acknowledgement. I think we've talked here before about how important that is, and thank you also for thinking forward about the 2% and how we can close that gap. That's really important. Any questions or comments with respect to the Executive Director's report? Seeing none, I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the Executive Director's report. Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Move forward to the public comment period. We have two folks who've signed up to address the commission today. Blaine Ackley, a resident of Hillsborough, and Mickey Barnes, a resident of Banks. Are they joining us via the? Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So my name is Blaine Ackley. I'm a resident of Hillsborough. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to address you commissioners this morning. I appear before you today because I'm concerned about the lead emissions from general aviation propeller-driven aircraft at the Hillsborough Airport. In fact, we know that lead in any amount is dangerous to a person's health and lead has a deleterious health effects on children and adults of all ages. We also know from a 2017 EPA study that of 20,000 airports in the United States, Hillsborough is ranked number 8 as most contaminated. From air monitoring studies, we are aware that areas surrounding the general aviation airports, especially those areas where the pilots rev their engines prior to takeoff or during takeoff, are the most dangerous areas for lead contamination in the environment. Yet we have sidewalks, bike paths, and even some park areas in the immediate vicinity of HIO, not to mention approximately 19,000 students reside within schools meeting 3 miles from the airport. Surely, as a government agency, the Port of Portland will want to notify people of any situations that are dangerous to their health. And as a good citizen, the port should want to be transparent with the public. Therefore, I'm asking you, the Portland Commissioners, to direct the HIO Airport Administration to begin placing public health warning signs along the fences, bikeways, and walkways in the immediate vicinity around the perimeter of the airport until such a time that leaded aviation gas is no longer used by any aircraft at HIO. I've provided a picture. I don't know if you have my written testimony or not, but the HIO could do something similar to what they've done in California with the warning signs placed around the perimeter. And I believe this is the Hill Reedview Airport in the San Jose area. And it just says that this area is within the kilometer of the airport, contains lead, a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm. Lead is contained in the aviation fuel. People living, working, or traveling near this location will be exposed to lead as aircraft take off and land. And so my recommendation to you is that we may not be able to do anything about that leaded aviation gas and the arrival of the non-leaded gas, and we have all of these things that we can't do. This is something we could do, and we could do it today. So I urge you to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ackley. I can assure you that we've received your written comment and it has been circulated to the commissioners. Thank you for your comment here.
Thank you.
Mickey Barnes?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. President Cooper Comas and commission members, thank you for this opportunity to present comments. My name is Mickey Barnes. I have lived in Washington County for 30 years. Though the Port of Portland has municipality status on par with a city or county, the members of the commission are appointed rather than elected. As a result, board members seldom interact with the residents impacted by their decisions. In the interest of democratic engagement, I urge direct communication with the public by providing email addresses and phone numbers of all board members and by holding town hall meetings in the jurisdictions impacted by the noise, pollution, safety, and security risks generated by Port of Portland airports. You know, under the port's watch, as Blaine said, Hillsborough Airport has become one of the top lead polluting airports in the country, 8th among 20,000 airports nationwide. By the way, I want to express my full support for Blaine's testimony and my gratitude to him for presenting it. A review of the Hillsborough Aero Academy, one of the main tenants at the airport, reveals that 2/3 of their students are from overseas. Of their 14 industry partners, 6 are Chinese airline, 1 is Korean Air, another is Japan Airlines, and 3 are European companies, while Alaska Air, Horizon, and Ameriflight are from out of state. A similar pattern is evident with their 9 collegiate partners. 3 are Japanese universities and 1 is Korean. In addition to Hillsborough Aero Academy, ATP, and Highelli Aviation provide flight training at HIO. The public has a right to know who is circling the skies over their homes while polluting the air, degrading their livability, compromising their health, and exposing them to serious safety and security risks. The community could be better served by repurposing the 900-acre HIO property. According to their website, this new Hillsborough development, Reed's Crossing, is located on 463 acres. Plans for this development include 2,458 single-family homes, 1,406 multifamily homes, over 30 acres of mixed-use commercial space, a 21-acre park, and a 23-acre greenway. The site further notes, quote, Reed's Crossing is intentionally designed to promote long-term well-being of people, place, and the community as a whole, unquote. Due to high noise volumes, lead emissions, and other toxic pollutants, the same cannot be said for Hillsborough Airport. In any case, you could fit 2 communities the size of Reed's Crossing into the space where HIO is now located. I am going to be submitting more detailed written comments for inclusion in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our consent agenda. I'll ask any commissioner if they want a presentation on the consent items. I'll read the titles. First is East Portland Enterprise Zone reauthorization. Second, on-call marine maintenance services contracts, Port of Portland Marine Facilities. Third, Port of Portland Fire Department Civil Service Commission appointment, Portland International Airport. And fourth, Hillsborough right-of-way project, grants of rights of way and easements at Hillsborough Airport. Okay, I don't see that we need a presentation, so I'll call for motion and second for approval of the consent items.
So moved.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to our action item, and I'll call on Dan Pippinger to introduce it.
I do have a potential conflict of interest to declare. As an owner of Bambusa, I have an interest in any action that affects the company. Therefore, I am declaring an actual conflict of interest. I did not participate in the concession selection process, and I will not participate in the discussion or vote.
I also have a conflict of interest statement as Executive Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Chief Human Resources Officer of Columbia Sportswear Company. I have an interest in any action that affects the company. Therefore, I'm declaring an actual conflict of interest. I did not participate in the concession selection process, and I will not participate in the discussion or vote.
Thank you, commissioners. We've noted that for the minutes. Dan.
Good morning, commissioners. Once again, I am really excited to be here with you today to present this slate of concessioners that have been chosen to fill the new Terminal Core project area. Just a reminder that the Terminal Core project under construction is scheduled to open in 2 phases. The first phase next May, and the second phase following in late 2025. And the concessions you'll see today will open along the lines of those 2 phases. The agenda item presents a list of businesses that the selection committee has recommended, including several existing and including both new and existing PDX partners, many of whom are here with us today and several of whom will speak. They will design, build, and operate local brands that will further enhance the award-winning concessions program and passenger experience at PDX. I'm really proud of the extensive efforts by the team conducting outreach, removing barriers to entry, and including community in the selection process. Shared prosperity is a foundational element of our program. And as I mentioned, we have made substantial progress in reducing expenses and barriers to entry for small business, but have also refined our approach to identify employers who will support their employees as well as the community. In addition, these concessions programs will add hundreds of new jobs at PDX. PDX already has an outstanding lineup of concessioners that will bring us that bring a broad and dynamic culture to our airport. And with your approval, that lineup is about to get even better. It's a balanced program that we believe contributes substantially to the success of PDX and will further the love the community has for the airport. Before I turn it over, I'd like to publicly acknowledge and congratulate Caitlin Hunter, the Senior Manager of Concessions Development and Customer Experience, and her full team for their exceptional work that continues to make the PDX concessions program world-class and an example to other airports throughout the nation. I'll turn it over to Caitlin now to go through the details.
Thank you, Dan. All right. Before I get started, I'd like to just acknowledge as well my team, Abby Carey and Shannon MacArthur, who are here today, who have poured their heart and soul over the last year into really getting this program right. Without them, we wouldn't be here today. So I'd like to acknowledge them. And also all of our concessionaires in the room. Like Dan mentioned, we have almost all of these folks represented today, as you can see. Full house. So thank you everybody for joining. We really appreciate you being here and your support. And with that, I will get started. First slide, please. So I just wanted to do a brief reminder of our current concessions program. So as of right now, we have 53 concessions locations at the airport. This is down from 66 locations prior to the terminal core project. We had to remove some of them in order to construct the building. So when we finish this program that's up for approval today, we'll be back to about 70 locations. So we're a very similar size to what we were before terminal core, but many of the locations are post-security as opposed to pre-security. So for a quick reminder of our goals, this is what we really refer to when we are trying to determine who's going to be at the airport. We want to maintain that best class airport that Dan mentioned. We want to represent our region authentically. We want to deliver what our customers want. Reducing barriers to entry is a huge piece of our program, and every RFP that we do, we strive to continue to reduce these barriers to entry for small businesses in the community. We also need to maximize our revenue potential and improve the quality of life for our customers, business owners, and tenant employees here at the airport. And the last one on the list, strike a balance with our current and incumbent partners and our new entrants, because we need a lot of the businesses that have been here in the past that represent our region, but we also need some new faces around here. Next slide, please. So talking to that last point of new and old folks here at the airport, we wanted to make sure we had a balance in our leasing process here. So we did a mix of 11 direct negotiations and 10 folks that were selected through the RFP process. So the direct negotiations were really as a result of those that were displaced due to the terminal core project. The 10 that were selected through the RFP process went through a pretty rigorous process, and they could probably all attest to that being here today, that it's not easy to go through the RFP process. So we started it about a year ago, reaching out to folks that might be interested in being here at the airport. And we did a really big push on social media to try and get the folks here that the community is looking for. We had over 100 meetings with local brands in the community. We did direct outreach to our local Chamber of Commerce. We held 2 large informational sessions here in this room where we had over 130 people total that came to learn about what it takes to be at the airport, what they would need to do to be able to operate here. And I think we got some really good folks from there. Our social media campaign, I'd just like to touch a little bit more on, and maybe we can switch to the next slide so I can give you guys a quick understanding of what that looks like. So you can see up here what our great comms team here did. And we really just wanted to make sure we reached into the community to find the folks that people wanted to see at the airport. And we ran this social media campaign. We got hundreds of responses on social media in regard to who our community wanted to see at the airport. And actually, 6 of the folks in the room today who are here for approval were tagged in this social media campaign, and they came full circle. They were initially tagged. Some of the folks we had talked to previously, but the community wanted them to be here. We wanted them to be here, and 6 of them are actually here today. Next slide, please. Another one of the program goals that I touched on initially is reducing barriers to entry. And this is a really important one for us because of the model of our direct leasing program here at PDX. We need to ensure that we keep our costs down for folks to build out here at the airport. With our average build out costs at around $1,000 a square foot for food and beverage locations and $500 a square foot for retail locations, we have to do everything we can to hold those numbers. We've seen those costs rise at other West Coast airports and almost double. And we want to ensure we are not in that same boat because we want to keep this direct leasing model and bringing in the local businesses where, they're pouring their heart and soul into being able to be here. And I think you'll hear that from folks today. So within our RFP process, we actually did a small build out allowance in order to help with some of the utilities associated with the new terminal core building. We are providing exhaust for the food and beverage locations due to the design of the roof that's really high. It would have cost our concessionaires quite a bit more money in order to put in that exhaust infrastructure, so the port is taking that on. We did our best to streamline the RFP requirements. We eliminated proposal bonds. We prohibited renderings. These are all expensive elements to submitting a proposal that are seen at other airports. We also allowed folks to just submit one proposal, even if they were interested in multiple locations, to try and cut down on the waste associated with having to submit multiple locations. And finally, you can see on the screen, we redesigned the RFP. One of the barriers to entry that we'd seen is actual small businesses not really understanding what a proposal looked like and what we were looking for as the selection committee. We designed this in a way that we thought could help model as an example for the concessionaires to actually take this and make their proposal look a similar way. So really provide photos, provide statistics, help us understand what their business looked like. And we really saw folks do that in this RFP. They took it to heart, and we're so thankful that we did this because we were really able to get some great proposals where we haven't seen responses like this in the past. And it was really a great way to help them understand the process. Next slide, please. So our key business terms for those folks that were in the RFP process, as well as the folks we direct negotiated, are up on the screen. Our standard food and beverage leases are 10 years and retail are 7. The rent is a percentage of gross receipts, and that is tiered by concept and location. We also, for the first time in these leases, removed the minimum annual guarantee for businesses and instead instituted a performance metric to help ensure that the right concepts are in the right locations here at the airport. We have a 3-month projected rent security deposit. We are providing that build-out allowance that I touched on before. Our fees are standard as they are in all other leases and listed up there. And then build-out costs are done by the tenant as well as the midterm refurbishment. And we are providing an on-time opening incentive in order to ensure that these folks are hopefully open when we open the terminal core project. Next slide, please. So back to the RFP process. We did use a selection committee that was both internal and external stakeholders. We wanted to ensure that we had a few folks from the community on that selection committee so that we were getting a representation from the community as well. But this is the weighting of the sections that we put into the RFP. The main piece of it, or the majority of it, is a proposed concept section. So 30% is the tenant really selling their business to us. What is your business? What is your proposed menu? And we take that and we evaluate how that fits into our greater program. Also, the design is an important piece. How are you going to lay out your space? We want to ensure that you've thought through the project team. All of those pieces of it is 20%. And then you can see on here the PDX employee-employer relationship plan, and shared prosperity is 25% of our overall evaluation. This is the largest percent that we've ever put on this specific item. Previously, we'd done a PDX employer-employer relationship plan, and it was started back in 2016. It was really just an evaluation of wages initially, but that's expanded over the years into wages and benefits and how these companies are actually treating their employees, what they're providing, kind of what their entire package is. And that's really come to a good spot in this RFP process. And then we added the shared prosperity section this time for the first time. And we were shocked at the responses we got. These companies are really sharing prosperity in our community. And I think you'll hear some of their stories when they come up to talk. But it's really inspiring to see what folks in the community are doing. And, seeing as one of our core values here at the Port of Portland is up on the wall that shared prosperity is a big component. We felt that 25% was necessary in order to ensure that we're doing businesses with the company that are representing the same values as us here at the port. We also have a 10% ACDBE section, which is our evaluation of small businesses through the FAA program. And then finally, 15% in the financial metrics. Next slide, please. So what did we get? We received 43 proposals from 35 different businesses, which was a great response. We were really pleased with that. 46% of those were from women and minority-owned businesses, and 21% were from small businesses, which is a really great in our opinion. For the 21 locations that we're recommending today, 100% of them are local brands. This is really something that you don't see within our airport industry. 100% local is just a great tribute to our program and what we do here, that we are bringing in the local brands that people in the community want to see. 17 of those are locally owned and operated as well. 7 with ACDBE participation, and 6 are women and minority-owned businesses. And as Dan mentioned earlier, over 500 new jobs are going to be created by these different businesses. $30 million in tenant investments. I just want to take a second to think about how much money that is for these concessionaires in the room and how they're willing to invest in our program here at PDX. And it's approximately $6 million in port revenue and over $55 million from these leases over the life of the leases. So now here it is, the moment of the big reveal. So next slide, please. So here are our pre-security locations. I'm just going to read you all a little bit about each of these companies so that you can understand who they are and what the concept is for these different locations. So if the folks are in the room when I read your little tidbit, if you want to just raise a hand so that folks know that you're here, be great. So our first one, our large mezzanine restaurant. Honestly, our staff was not sure what we were going to get with this large location here, but thankfully, Loyal Legion is put together a great proposal, and they are named for the Loyal Legion of Loggers and Lumbermen Workers Union. The Loyal Legion Beer Hall highlights the rich history of the timber industry in Oregon with a nod to the future of the local lumber through its adjacency to PDX's sprawling 9-acre mass timber roof. PDX will be home to Loyal Legion's 4th location, serving as a landmark central restaurant accessible to all users of the airport, including non-ticketed customers. Kurt, is your team here? That's a shot. All right. Well, if we clap for everyone, we might be here all day. So I'll ask you to hold your applause till the end, if you don't mind. Our next one, Paper Epiphany, global greeting card brand that combines expressive stationery, art, and gifts that celebrate the powerful presence of women in the world through a commitment to purchasing at least 75% of all products from women and BIPOC-owned companies. This Portland-based business with a massive wholesale market will open its second brick-and-mortar location here at PDX. Victoria? All right, Hello from Portland brings its Pearl District shops to PDX with a current selection of treats, souvenirs, and gifts showcasing some of the city's finest makers and artisans. Marshall Retail Group has teamed up with this women-owned business and other BIPOC partners to showcase more than 75 local and regional brands. Country Cat, serving up a made-from-scratch dining experience at PDX since 2014. Local favorite, the Country Cat, returns to PDX in a reimagined counter-service restaurant and market that is now accessible to the whole community in a pre-security location. All About Food Groups has partnered with celebrity chefs and Country Cat founder Adam and Jackie Sappington for this new venture. And our final one for pre-security, Portland Coffee Roasters. Since 2016, Portland Coffee Roasters has been serving PDX customers through the embodiment of their mission to forge positive human connections and build a socially responsible business through great coffee. 2 new PDX locations will replace those impacted by construction to maintain 3 airport cafes serving espresso, specialty coffee drinks, pastries, and gifts. Thanks. And finally, I'll just mention on this slide something that's not pointed out and is actually not in this commission item, but the 2 blue boxes next to the Country Cat and Portland Coffee Roasters are actually a pop-up retail program that we've designated for small businesses. The port is going to build out those locations, and small businesses will be able to bring in just their product and some signage, and that will be used as a great opportunity to bring in some of these folks that maybe aren't ready for a full build out at the airport, but want to test out the market and see what it's like to be at the airport. So those will be short-term leases, only a year for each of those locations, so they're not a part of this, but I just wanted to mention something that we're doing there. All right, next slide, please. Right, South Hall. We're going to start with local coffee icon Stumptown Roasters. We'll continue its partnership with third-generation family and BIPOC-owned Latrell's Gallery in a new PDX outpost, rounding out its 3 airport coffee cafes. Chris, I think I saw you here. Next, we have Capers Bistro. It says market up there, but it will be bistro in the future. A longstanding staple at PDX, this woman-owned business will begin a new generation at PDX with a reimagined Oregon wine bar, bistro, and bottle shop, featuring a French-inspired menu of pastries, small plates, and charcuterie. Next, we have Columbia Sportswear. Based in Portland and celebrating 80 years of innovation and outdoor gear, Columbia Sportswear is a global outdoor brand that crafts active lifestyle gear fortified with industry-leading technologies. Their apparel, footwear, and accessories continue to reflect the Pacific Northwest's heritage at PDX. SSP America offers a full-service, modern culinary experience inspired by six-time James Beard nominee chef Kathy Wims and barman Ryan Margarine, sorry if I mispronounced your last name, Ryan, in Oven and Shaker. They have wood-fired Napoleon pizza, which is made in-house using a sourdough starter that is over 70 years old. I think they're here today. Next, we have Cure Superfoods, voted best juice bar by Willamette Weekly's readers poll 7 years in a row. Cure has been serving fast, delicious, healthy foods to Portlanders since 2011. Specializing in smoothies, shakes, bowls, breakfast sandwiches, and other quick bites, customers at PDX will be fueled well without sacrificing taste. Nate? Right, next we have Lola's Cafe and Bar. Certified nutritionist and co-owner of Lola's Cafe, Katie Allstedt, knows the secret to powering diners through their day without weighing them down. As a sister restaurant to Lake Oswego's mainstay, Gubak's and Babaka Hen, Lola's Counter Service Cafe continues the third-generation family-owned tradition at PDX with core values rooted in sustainability and social equity. Joe? Great, and finally on this side, Straightaway Cocktails. In addition to their flagship store in Portland's Distillery Row and partnership with Alaska Airlines, customers will be able to enjoy flights of award-winning cocktails made with their own bitters, syrups, and liqueurs paired with locally sourced snacks in the PDX tasting room. A wide range of bottled and canned craft cocktails will also be available to purchase on site. Great, thank you. Next slide, please. All right, and finally, the North Hall. So we're gonna go ahead and start with Pendleton, a legacy Oregon-owned company established in 1863 and headquartered in Portland. Pendleton Woolen Mills has been weaving world-class products into two Pacific Northwest mills for more than 100 years. Along with wool blankets, it has offerings of apparel and accessories, home goods, and gifts to its PDX customers since 2012. I don't think they're here today. Next one, Freeland Spirits. One of Jill's here, I know. One of very few women-owned and operated craft distilleries in history, Freeland Spirits will bring their Portland-made award-winning gin, whiskey, seasonal mixers, and more to PDX with a tasting room and retail shop. Named for Jill Keeler, its grandmother, Mima, Freeland Spirit honors its passion for farming and agriculture with strong connections to grain and botanical producers of the Pacific Northwest. Portland Gear, Marcus. Portland Gear creates apparel and products that celebrate the people, style, and pride of Portland. In their stores, you'll find collaborations with local sports teams, including the Trailblazers, Thorns, and Timbers, and licensed gear for OSU, U of O, and many more. Smith Tea Maker, a global leader in artisanal tea innovation and one of the fastest growing beverage companies in the nation, Stephen Smith Tea Maker started and remains based right here in Portland. Stephen Smith Tea Makers will offer handcrafted small batch teas, tasting flights and pairings, along with seasonal treats and gifts to PDX travelers. These guys are here. Great, next we have Sizzle Pie, famous for its high energy vibe and a Portland spin on pizza. Sizzle Pie has been ranked in the top 10 independent pizzerias in the country. With their signature swag and pizza by the slice, of course with plant-based options, there's something for everyone. Next, we have Blue Star Donuts, serving gourmet donuts for grown-ups with quality ingredients and seasonal offerings. Portland's favorite Blue Star will expand its current airport presence with a fully equipped kitchen where customers can watch the signature 18-hour brioche donuts being fried on site. They're here today. Grassa, known for fine dining quality pasta in an accessible environment with affordable price points, Grassa makes handcrafted pasta in front of their guests and cooks to order at all 5 Portland area locations. The new PDX location will carry on that tradition with a pasta making counter. Grassa. Oh, there. All right. Thanks. And finally, Portland House Distilling. Rooted in the hardworking coastal community of Astoria, Pilot House Distilling will feature their award-winning handcrafted spirits coupled with an expansive menu celebrating the Oregon coast in a full-service bar and restaurant where diners are sure to find sister company and local favorite Bowie beer on tap. All right, next slide, please. So here's the schedule. As mentioned earlier, folks in the first phase, 12 different locations will begin design right after the approval today. And then our 9 locations in the second phase will begin in the fall of 2024, and all should be complete by the end of 25. Next slide, please. With that, we have the executive director recommendation in front of you, but I would like to invite some folks from the audience to come up and tell you a little bit about their businesses. And then if there's any questions afterward, I'd be happy to address those. So, Madam President, would you mind calling them up?
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see, we'll start with Victoria Venturi from Paper Epiphanies. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having me. I'm Victoria, the founder and CEO of Paper Epiphanies. Our nickname is Piff, and I'm super excited to be here today. When we first started this RFP process back last fall, we hung up T2TL84, which was our hopeful number all around our house and our office, super discreetly, and for good mojo. And one of our super on-trend employees who works the weekend shift at the flagship store pulled me aside and said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely. We have an open door policy. Anytime you can talk to us. That's our policy." And she said, "If you can't remember the Wi-Fi password, you can just program it into your phone." So clearly we're not that cool. But we are honored to be here today. We are humbled to be here. Shared prosperity is part of the lifeblood of our brand. We run an artist in residency program through our company where we bring local Portland artists into our store every quarter. We work with them to create art for our cards. We help those cards to go nationwide to our wholesale partners as well as sold in our brick and mortar flagship. And that is part of our lifeblood. That is something that with this partnership at the port, we'll be able to give these artist partners and our other vendor partners a platform unlike any other. This isn't 12 cards or 12 candles. This will be 1,200 cards, 1,200 candles. We will be changing these women's lives in a real dynamic way. Yes, it's life-changing for my family and my company, but the trickle-down effect is real. 75% of the shelf space in our store goes to women and BIPOC artists and makers. And I just get emotional thinking about what this platform will do for these women. So thank you for living with your values. It's one thing to do a planning report and make core values and put it on a wall. It's another thing to live those values. And your team is class act. Caitlin, Abby, and Shannon championed me as a female business owner over the last 18 months. There was numerous times where I was like, okay, I'm just going to back out. This is intimidating for any business, a corporate business, but for a small woman-owned business, there were many times where I thought maybe I should just stop. And they championed me as a leader and said, nope, keep going. And here I am. So thank you so much for this opportunity. We are so pumped to be a raging success together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll have Kurt Huffman from Chef's Table.
Thank you. Let's try this one. First of all, my wife wanted to extend a thank you to the commission for making this business casual. Normally, I'm dressed more of kind of in a homeless thematic, so the suit jacket was a big win here at the house. My company, Chef's Table, we started in 2008, and we partner with independent restaurant chefs, and we then with them grow and develop independent restaurants. Our first project was Pok Pok, and then we've done 40 to 50 different ones over the last 13 years. I grew up in Portland, and because my father was a professor, I traveled a lot, so I have a huge amount of affinity for the airport, and wonderful personal memories having to do with it. So on a personal level, very exciting to be out here, and proud to bring out, I'll just go ahead and list the people that we've partnered with here. If I go down the list, it's Nate from Cure is bringing out just a really fabulous concept. I think in terms of quality of product is something that's not currently here. Very excited about that. Loyal Legion, we have Adam and Daryl here. We were just nominated, we were just awarded the very prestigious and very inexpensive looking award from the Oregon Beer Awards for the best beer bar in Oregon. We feature 99 beers on tap. I may have to have a heart replacement after this project is over, so I'll be sure to send the bill to you guys. Pilot House, really privileged to work with Luke and Dave and the owners of Pilot House, and very excited to bring that project out here. And then finally, Grassa, my partner Jessica Silverman is here, and we're excited. Chef's Table is actually going to start a new division of Chef's Table dedicated to the airport, and that project will be led by Jackie Newton and Jessica Silverman, who are also here with me. So just a huge thank you, great opportunity for us, and thanks again.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Joe Buck and Katie Allstat from Lola's Cafe.
Hi, commissioners. It's great to be with you here this morning. So Joe Buck, Katie Allstat, owners of Lola's. We're here today to express gratitude and appreciation. First to your team here at the port. The clear communication, transparency, and kind patience with which they shepherded folks like us through the RFP process is noteworthy and positively contributes to the port's ability to attract the types of local small businesses that will enhance the overall experience for both the workforce and passengers at PDX. We also want to thank all of you as leaders. We appreciate the work the port is doing to recognize the significant role that local businesses play in enhancing their communities. For any city, neighborhood, or town, the local business community is the engine that's growing leaders in the workforce and contributing through resources and leadership to the civic ecosystem that supports our neighbors and fellow local businesses. For us, this is an opportunity to grow through the prosperity of our employees and the many small business partners in our sphere. Any small business, right, is only as healthy as the team of employees driving it. And while every business has that creator who brings that initial spark of life to an idea, it's then the many hands and faces of our teams who fan that spark through their immense talents, their creativity, and care for one another and those that they cross paths with daily. So Katie and I are honored to be the two smiling faces before you, but the opportunity provided us by the port is one that's met with elated anticipation for enhanced growth for our own team of leaders back in Lake Oswego. We owe a great deal of gratitude to our team of employees who directly participated in the RFP process and who support one another and our operations daily. This, like every day, is an immense team effort. We look forward to bringing the community of partnership that we share, not just with our employees, but with fellow local businesses and community organizations in our current neighborhood here at PDX. I want to thank all of you for this opportunity, and we're looking forward to the years of working with you to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have Jill Kuehler from Freeland Spirits. Apologies if I've mispronounced. Please correct me.
Thank you, commissioners. Myself and our team could not be more giddy than to be a part of the best airport in the world. We are women-owned and operated distillery. Freeland is named after my Mima Freeland. I grew up in her garden with her in Texas. And even though she never touched a drop of booze in her life, she now has a distillery named after her. But she did teach me that women can be anything they want to be, and that all the good things in life come from scratch. We are now celebrating 5 years in business. Our Northwest tasting room in Portland was really designed around a culture of celebration and education. When people come in to visit, they learn about the farmers and ranchers that grow our grain and our botanicals that go into our gin and whiskeys. And then they can go on a tour and meet the distillers and learn about what makes Freeland Spirits so delicious and how the production happens. And we really plan on bringing that same culture of education and celebration to the Portland Airport. We're really excited to use this opportunity to grow a lot of our community programs, like our Free Spirits program, which each month celebrates a female identifying Oregonian who's doing really groundbreaking work. And she works with our tasting room staff to design a cocktail, and proceeds of that kit go to whatever nonprofit she chooses. And we're really looking forward to growing that initiative along with other equity and inclusion efforts that we have going on at Freeland. We really see the airport as being a hub of our growing business as we gain distribution across the country. And we really look forward to celebrating with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Marcus Harvey from Portland Gear. Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. My name's Marcus. I'm the owner of Portland Gear. Born and raised here in Portland. Walked through the airport as a kid my whole life, and this is definitely an awesome experience for us. And yeah, this is just, I checked my email this morning. I sent an email to Abby in 2015. We were only a year and a half old, and I was already dreaming of being out here. And I've probably annoyed her about once a month for the last several years. She knows it, but I guess persistence pays off. And we're very excited. I'm a cheerleader for Portland. I love this town. And when other people don't, it makes me love it even more. And we put Portland on stuff and wear it proudly. I usually have my uniform of a P hat on. If you don't know, our P logo's got the state of Oregon inside of it. That's kind of our whole thing. My Instagram is @Portland. So I have 380,000 followers on there. I started that years ago. So I love this town. I love this place. I appreciate you guys for taking on small businesses like us and giving this an opportunity. This is huge for us, for a lot of the people in here. And yeah, to see our product all over the world will just be incredible. So I thank you guys. Yeah, we're very excited. We will be screaming from the rooftops, Portland pride all over the world. And, we kind of think our niche is going to be when something happens in Portland, we'll be telling the story of it here in the airport. So when it's the beautiful cherry blossoms in springs, we will have a collection here. When it's Pride Month, we will have a collection. And it just adds to kind of our authenticity in the story of Portland. So when people arrive, we greet them with awesome merchandise and stuff that tells a story. And when we leave, they can take home something with them. So thank you guys. And we look forward to making an awesome store out here.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments. If the commission has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Well, I won't start with questions. I'll just start with thanking your teams and all of the people in the room, frankly, for all of the hard work that has gone into it this over many, many years. I know for those of us that have been on the commission, excuse me, for a while, we've seen sort of the progression of the thinking about workplace and thinking about barriers to participating in the port, and your process and program really tackled all of those things. It elevated how employees would be treated, how we thought about the conditions that they would work in, which I think is really important, and really broke down the processes in a way that I think resulted in the success that we see in the room today. So I can't thank you enough for that, because I think that's been our drive for a really long time as a commission to elevate those things. So thank you for that. And I'll open it to comments or questions. Commissioner Alexander.
Yes, and let me also offer my thanks. I think so often you think about Portland, you think about where we are. You're helping to define who we are. And that makes a huge difference when people arrive here. I do have to say that in looking at all of the awards today, it's not going to help me to lose the COVID-20 that I gained over the last few years between the restaurants and the food. It's just not, but the wine and the beer and the whiskey will help me not care about it. So again, I offer my thanks. We are looking forward to have you continue to define and refine our brand and our community and our values. And we are very, very fortunate to have you as a part of that story.
Commissioner Samput.
Certainly, I find myself really thirsty and really hungry. I don't know why, but so Caitlin and the team, thank you for leading a very rigorous process in getting all our applicants through this, and thank you for the businesses, especially who are stepping forth the first time. As a fellow entrepreneur, it just gladdens my heart to see people taking risks and kind of defining who they are and defining, as Michael said, who we are as a city and a region. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you so much for being here. It's very exciting to hear about some new offerings at the airport, but I also just want to take a second and say I'm also excited to see Capers returning and some of the other concessionaires that have been there for passengers and for PDX through some challenging few years. So thank you for returning and for being there for all of us the last few years.
Commissioner Kova.
I will just say your enthusiasm is so contagious. I get the feeling you all don't really know each other because you don't act like you know each other. The community is amazing. Staff, I know how hard this is. And to go through and redesign a procurement process in order to make this more accessible for small business in Portland is the right thing to do. It's also a very hard thing to do from the staff side. Hopefully the small businesses, I'm hearing a little bit of pain still getting through the process. Thank you for hanging in there. And your feedback, I think, to us in terms of how we can continue to improve that in the future would also be very helpful. But I can't wait for the businesses to be open. And I'm kind of like Michael and Kaiten, I'm very hungry and very thirsty and want to go there now and maybe do a little shopping too. So thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the recommendation.
I so move.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The record should show that Commissioners Luther and Lamb did not participate in the vote. Thank you very much. Thank you for your investment in us. Go ahead.
I'll just note for our visitors, you don't need to feel obligated to stick around for our budget presentation. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate all of you.
Thanks. We'll call Antoinette while people gather. We're just taking a couple of minutes, so please get comfortable.
Figuring out how to yeah, like how do we do something fun and cool that is in no way reminiscent? I invite them, but it's also like not. Yes, great.
Okay, I think we have a quorum of the commissioners in the room, so I will ask us to move forward with the rest of our agenda. Antoinette, if you want to introduce the item, please.
Happy to. Good morning, commissioners. Let me start out by saying how proud I am to work for the port after viewing that presentation. It was nothing short of phenomenal. And just want to say that certainly it's a hard act to follow because the excitement in the room, and like everybody said, all I kept thinking was cocktails, cocktails, cocktails. So very excited about that. But we are going to shift gears here for a little bit and talk with you all about the economy and talk to you all about our budget today. So as you all know, we really like to set the stage for what we think are important and central tenets of the economy, how we think about it nationally, regionally, locally, and how that really informs the development of our budget. So I have before you today Dr. Wilkerson, Dr. Michael Wilkerson. He's a partner and director of analytics at Eco Northwest. He brings over 15 years of private sector experience as an economic consultant and as an analyst in the financial services industry. Mike studies urban economics for both public and private sector clients with a focus on land use, transportation, and real estate development, and how they really interact with the regional economy. He regularly presents at national conferences on topics related to real estate economics, including the American Planning Association, the National Multifamily Housing Council, and the Urban Land Institute. Mike is currently an adjunct professor in the Masters of Real Estate Development program at Portland State University. And Mike, as part of his presentation, will outline his views, as I mentioned, on the national, regional, and local economy, and discuss a few key trends impacting our regional economy. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Wilkerson.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Have some brief remarks this morning, and then certainly happy to take questions if there are any afterwards. We certainly sit at an interesting time in terms of the economy with a great deal of uncertainty. Many of the traditional indicators are pointing in one direction while others are pointing in a different direction. I think this is an important time to unpack kind of some of that uncertainty. So if we can hop to the next slide, please. What we're really looking at here, I think, is a crossroads, and that crossroads puts us on one of two paths. One of those would be what is called a soft landing. The soft landing is the idea that the Federal Reserve, through active policy, can navigate these dual crises that they're focused on. What they're focused on is dual mandates of inflation and employment, and all of the attention of late is on inflation. And so what they're doing is trying to get inflation under control. And what a soft landing would be is them successfully doing that without putting the economy into a recession. And that is very challenging to do, and oftentimes hasn't happened. The other outcome is a recession. And so that's really the uncertainty. Go to the next slide. Maybe this is animated. If not, I can talk through it. There we go. And so there are a variety of economists out there making predictions, right? You can ask a group of 100 economists who sit in a room, what day is it? And they're going to fight. There is no uniform agreement amongst economists. So typically, you can look at a variety of measures. The New York Fed produces a probability of recession every month. And you can see, starting midway through the year, they're predicting a recession to really start reasonably over 50% chance over the next 12 months of a recession. And if you look at the indicators, you would struggle to understand why that is the case. We have near record low unemployment. We have strong GDP growth. We're adding hundreds of thousands of jobs, maybe less than we were a few months ago, but still hundreds of thousands of jobs. The number of job openings per unemployed person is almost 2 to 1, near historic highs. Consumer spending is still strong, and households have still maintained excess savings that they accumulated during the pandemic and are continuing to spend. And so when you look at all those variety of indicators, you would say the risk of recession is very low. The one indicator, though, that points differently is a result of the Fed activity. So if we can go to the next slide. The one and only indicator historically that has consistently predicted a recession is what's called an inverted yield curve. That is to say the long-term interest rates are lower than the short-term interest rates, and that typically doesn't happen. And if you look on the chart, those red arrows are every time it's been inverted, and then the gray bars, which are a little bit hard to see, are the recessions that have followed. The lags of that are varied, but we are now in the largest inversion of a yield curve that we've seen since the 1980s. And the question, when economists see this, the answer is only one. It's, well, we have to be facing a recession. And so I think that's really where the divergence happens, is when you look at this one indicator that says this is a lot of risk, we're going to have a recession. If you're in that mindset, that's why you think we're in a recession. If you look at all of the other indicators, then you would tend to lead into the fact that, yeah, the economy is on stable ground. And the question becomes, how much is that Fed activity going to push us into a different path? And can we navigate a soft landing or not? Go to the next slide, please. What the state's baseline understanding is that we are not going to go into a correction, that we are on a path towards a soft landing. And so that's their recovery is the gray bar. We've gone through what they call the square root recovery, the largest, quickest loss of jobs ever that we've now recovered. We've recovered all the jobs statewide as of last summer, with the notable exception, I would say, of Multnomah County. Multnomah County still has not recovered all of the jobs, since that is a big outlier. But what they're expecting is continued growth. So you can look on the right-hand side. The two employment scenarios are showing baseline of soft landing and then what a correction would look like as an alternative scenario. What I would say is, although, yes, the alternative scenario does have some job loss, it's a very minor correction. And it's a very minor correction because the unemployment rates are still historically going to be very low under that scenario, under 7%. And we're still expected to see personal income growth. And so really what this is about is concentrated losses. And certainly for those people who are losing jobs, that's important. But for the overall strength of the economy, this is a growth scenario in either of these two lenses. You can go to the next slide, please. Really, I think the key indicator, and if I had this slide as of this morning at 6:30, I could add another bar to that, which is the March data was just released. The March data dropped. So the March data showed a month-over-month change of about 0.1%. That's more in line with what we saw at the end of last year. I think the point is, though, when you look at inflation, when we hit those peaks, we were hitting much higher numbers month over month than we have been over the last 4, 5, 6 months. And while that's encouraging, the Fed's policy position is that until we hit 2% inflation, they're going to take corrective action. And they have been consistently rising the federal funds rate, and that spills into all other parts of the economy in terms of interest rates. What we know with near certainty is that the inflation rate can't really get below 2 or anywhere near 2 for the foreseeable future. Why is that? If you look at the last 6 months of interest rates, we're already over 2%. And so even if we have zero interest rate growth for the next 6 months, we're still going to be above that target. I think the question for the Fed is, if you see, let's say last month was 0.1, and the next month is 0.1 and 0, how many months of that do you need to see before you say we don't have an inflation problem anymore versus we're still over 2%? And that's the big uncertainty. And the Fed has been consistent in saying until we hit 2%, we're going to continue raising interest rates. That's where you have this big divergence. And so if the Fed continues to consistently raise interest rates for the next 6 months or more, that puts us on a very different economic path than one where the Fed says, yes, typically we target 2%, but we have enough other indicators that tell us we don't really think inflation is a problem. The main culprit in inflation today is housing. And certainly in this region, we're aware of that. The way that the Fed measures housing, if you asked any economist to do, they would not come up with that answer. What they look at is owner's equivalent rent. That is to say, if an owner had to rent their house, how much would they rent it for? And most owners don't rent their house. They have mortgages or no mortgages. And so because of that, housing has been elevated and has not peaked yet. Housing costs are still increasing and driving effectively all of the inflation at this point. And so what I would suggest is it's a broken measure of housing that's showing inflation. But if you strip housing out, durable goods, for example, over the last year, durable goods cost less now than they did a year ago. It's services, non-durable goods, and it's housing and energy. And so depending on how you measure inflation, I think the Fed is now going to have to think about this in terms of what this committed policy is. And this is really where most of the uncertainty lies. Next slide, please. What I would say is, the Oregon recovery has generally been pretty robust from the COVID-related pandemic. Through the lens of shared prosperity, though, I think we still see very deep kind of systemic problems that are, yes, improving, but something that we should be still keenly focused on. And so one of those is the median income for households. If we look at that by race and ethnicity, compared to white households, Black or American Indian Native populations or Hispanic Latino populations continue to see that median income at 20, 30, 40% lower than the white households. And so from a shared prosperity narrative, this is something that, yes, we are adding jobs. Yes, we are growing incomes, but that is something that should be, I think, still keenly as a part of the overall comprehensive analysis. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about inflation, and we've talked a lot about a recession. I think nationally that is most relevant. We have a different circumstance in Oregon and specifically in the Portland metro, where when you think about economic growth, it's typically driven by two parts: productivity gains and really growing the population and the workforce. And what we've seen in Oregon is productivity has stagnated over the last several years. It's predicted to maybe slightly increase, but really our economy is not being driven through a growth in productivity. It's being driven through a growth in population, residents, local serving economy, and also certainly the trade sector. And so when the state looks at future growth, what they're factoring in is a change in population. And if we go to the next slide, what we see is a very drastic change from where we were 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, certainly. Portland and Oregon, for that matter, were some of the fastest growing regions in the country. That peaked in 2016 and has now been decreasing. And when we think about growth, there are two components of growth. There's natural change. Natural change is the number of people born in a year versus the number of people dying in a year. We've now tipped into a place where that natural change is negative and will be negative for the foreseeable future. That is to say, looking at the demographics in the state, there's no real scenario where we're going to see natural growth. And so the only way the state will grow into the future is through migration. And when we look at the components of migration, that's domestic and international. And so what we're seeing in the Portland metro and statewide is that what had once been one of the fastest growing regions is now tipping into negative. And the state hasn't factored this into their forecasts. And this is a big area of uncertainty, and I would say much more so than the interest rate dynamic and some of the other larger macro international topics. For example, the state pre-pandemic had forecasted an increase over the last 2 years of 80,000 residents in the state. In reality, we had a decrease of 4,000 residents. That is not a rounding error. That is effectively about the equivalent of about 60,000 jobs or 2 years of very strong growth. So when you're thinking about the headwinds, the change in population is the dominant headwind that we need to be aware of. Yes, the other factors certainly matter. And I think from the state's perspective, they're looking at this very keenly. They haven't factored this into the forecast, but if they did, that would put us on a very different trajectory than one where they're forecasting kind of continued growth, more in lines with what we've seen over the past many decades. So that's the kind of larger regional view. Within the region, though, there is a dynamic that is emerging. If we go to the next slide, what we'll see is typically the Portland Metro has been growing in the 4 counties that make up the urban metro. And that trend has changed pretty dramatically. What we're seeing now is Clark County is where all of the growth is happening. The 3 Oregon counties for the last 2 years have effectively lost population, certainly heavily concentrated in Multnomah County. That's heavily concentrated in the city of Portland. This is the trend that we need to be aware of. What this means for the regional economy, where we once had pretty balanced growth across the region, we're now seeing effectively most of that growth or all of that growth effectively happening on the Vancouver side or Washington State side of the region. And this is something that, again, matters for the regional economy in the sense of where the local sector jobs are located. So again, I mentioned Multnomah County hasn't recovered the jobs lost in the recession. Clark County has 9% more jobs than they did previously. Next slide, please. What I would say is that while that is maybe a troubling kind of headwind, it's not entirely atypical from what we've seen across the country. And what we've seen across the country during the 2 years that we have data from the pandemic is the urban form or rural form of the location is really driving the behavior that we're seeing. So when we look at large metros that are urban counties, of which this is this location, we've seen negative growth. So the darkest blue line is 2022. On average, you're seeing population decreases. The change is that's about 1/3 of what you saw in 2021. And so most places that are large urban metros are still losing population, but much less so than they did in the previous year. And we're still in line with that trend. I think that's the consideration as we think about this from a policy perspective at the state level, at the regional level, and certainly at the city level. Next slide, please. I think what that then leads us to is, what is this new normal? What does this mean? Is this a new normal where the population is stagnant? Is this a new normal population is growing? Beyond that, we also have this kind of re-envisioning of how regional economies function. Go to the next slide, please. What that largely looks at is people working from home in a hybrid environment. In work that we've done with Portland Business Alliance, we've established kind of 5 or 6 peer regions. And what we see is Portland is amongst the highest of those peer regions in terms of remote work. Only Austin and Seattle are lower. The national number is about 8%. So we're 3 times more concentrated in remote work. And what that means is certainly a reimagining of how the regional economy functions, where people would use transportation to go to central locations for employment are doing so much less so now. And we see that very clearly in the data. We go to the next slide, please. What we can now track is effectively through cell phone data, individuals at an hourly basis and where they're located. And what the data allows us to do is look at whether a person is a visitor, that is to say they don't reside there and they're not an employee there, versus if they're an employee there. And we can track that foot traffic relative to pre-pandemic baselines. Certainly at the peak of the pandemic, we saw 80-90% reduction in foot traffic. And then as people started returning to work and business has resumed more normal workforce, what we saw was a consistent recovery. That recovery has, I would say, generally leveled and stabilized as of about a year ago. I think this is indicative of what a new normal might look like. And what that new normal might look like is in a central city. So this is not just downtown. This is the Central East Side, the Pearl, South Waterfront, kind of our central city, what other places call Central Business District. That foot traffic is down about 50% from where it was. And so from an office user standpoint, from a retail activity standpoint, from a where people are moving transportation system impact, much less than we saw pre-pandemic. On the visitor front, similarly, we're down about 25% from where we were previously. And the visitor, I would say, is the difference that we're seeing that's more prevalent in Portland and other places. If we go to the next slide, nationally, office badge swiping is kind of the best way that people can accurately see what's going on from an activity basis, is down about 50%. So the fact that we're in that similar space from an employment is not, I would say, atypical. We're a little bit higher because that's our total employment versus if you looked at office employment, the retail and other, hospitality are in person much more so. So we're a little bit lower. It's really our tourist activity and our visitor activity that are depressed. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that in the data. Certainly, as a port, you're aware of what's happening from a travel perspective. If we look at hotel occupancy in Portland compared to some of our peer regions, we're down about 26%, and that's kind of room reservations. That's not occupancy rate. Seattle is down 14%. Salt Lake, Indianapolis are slightly down. Austin in their central city is up. Nashville had a massive increase in hotel room construction and have then seen big increases. What I think you'd see is the rest of the region is only down 3%. So when we think about tourist activity in the region, it's pretty close to where we were pre-pandemic. Really where this is concentrated is in our central city. One of those reasons I think is certainly tourists. The other is conventions. Convention activity is really down from where it was. I think we've seen some big conventions sign, a couple years from now. So that's very promising. But when we look out over the next several years, this trend, I would say, is likely to continue at this level rather than a big step up in the increase. Part of the reason for that is, if we go to the next slide, the sentiment of tourists from around the country is kind of stagnating as well. Where we once had more than 50% of surveyed people around the country saying it was appealing, 35% saying neutral and very few unappealing, we're now kind of in that, a third space. And we've been there for the better part of the last 2 years. The national media shining a spotlight on Portland with a very specific narrative that's not grounded in data and reality is certainly not helping. But I think this is a headwind, again, that is going to be challenging to overcome over the next several years. So when we're thinking about the strength of the economy, how the central city functions as part of the regional economy, this is kind of a new normal that I would say is likely to persist, certainly over the next couple of years. Last slide, I think, is, next slide, please. The notion of a soft landing. 6 months to 8 months ago, it was laughable in economic circles to think that we could have safely landed. We're now getting to the point where I think this is, again, in the state's perspective, the most likely outcome. And there's a lot of uncertainty, again, that could be driving this, largely around the Fed behavior, and that Fed behavior is going to be tied in some fashion to inflation. So when we're looking at the data that came out this morning, that's very promising. And if that continues over the next several months, I think that makes this soft landing much more likely outcome than if we see inflation, kind of persisting at higher levels. So thank you for your time this morning. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions, Commissioner Luther?
I'm just curious whether you see in the data particular policies or point of view that you think could make the biggest impact in turning back those numbers.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly Portland's central city is not unique in reimagining a future. This is commonplace in most office-centric places. I think the challenge in Portland is the strength of the other communities in the region has grown so much more so now that there are lots of other very successful amenity-based places, whether that's Vancouver, Gresham, Hillsborough, Milwaukee. All of those communities have done a really good job focusing on their placemaking efforts and have seen strong growth in both population growth and kind of the diversification. And so from the city's perspective, this is a very different circumstance than was the case, let's say, a decade ago. And so now the city is thinking about how it can compete successfully in the region. And that's a little bit different than you see in other places where you don't have that kind of more diversified regional kind of success. So yeah, policies I think are targeting around Central City and specifically downtown recovery are the big lifts. Office vacancy rates certainly at all-time highs. The commercial real estate markets really struggling with some distressed assets because of the interest rate environment. That's the big lift, is how do you get employees engaged and wanting to be in their in their workspace, and then activating that local economy around that is a big challenge.
Commissioner Samput.
Well, thank you. That was really good in terms of understanding what we're navigating. Looking at a longer term horizon, because we as a port make investments that are multi-decade investments. Are you seeing anything in the data that indicates there's a shift away from the West Coast, as some articles in the Economist, New York Times kind of indicate that there's a kind of multi-year shift, or is this a 2 or 3 year kind of settling into the new normal?
A great question. I mean, I can certainly give you my opinion.
Yeah,
on that,
we'd love
which
to
is,
hear that.
You know, one economist's opinion. I think it's premature to look at the data and say that this is a permanent change. In fact, some of the recently released data is suggesting kind of phenomenons around Zoom towns were maybe a short term in nature. And so you're still seeing, you know, growth in the West Coast. I think the more challenging question we think about a regional economy is where within the region is that located. From the port's perspective, though, if we're thinking about long-term, you know, economic growth in the region, I don't see that based on data has changed. I think the natural amenities, the second paycheck, all of the things that have made Portland and the region a place that people want to be are still here. And those are only going to continue to be in more demand in facing things like climate change that make this region more attractive relative to other changes. Certainly housing affordability and other measures, you know, have a lot to do with that. But if you look at the long-term trajectory, none of those underlying fundamentals have changed.
And I just follow on from a policy perspective, as the state is grappling with this, and it seemed like you indicated that net population inflows is probably the biggest lever that can be affected. Are there other policy recommendations that you would give us as a body to think about to kind of ensure economic vitality of as we are thinking and influencing?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the ports is an important contributor to the economic system of the region. Looking for opportunities to grow the economy in highly productive ways is always going to be important in terms of stimulating the overall state economy because of the tax structure, and providing high quality jobs is going to attract people to the region. So to the extent that you continue to do good work in that space, that can help move the needle.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alexander.
This is extremely helpful, enlightening, and distressing in all ways. I was drawn to one of the comments that you made about the state having recovered for the most part from its job losses. Is it that have those jobs been recovered or replaced? When I begin to think about particularly communities of color that lost huge slats of small businesses, those businesses have not come back. So, I mean, I think the numbers can say, you know, population A went into this factor, but I'm wondering under what conditions are there sectors of growth that should be targeted to us as we look at our own sort of shared prosperity work? I mean, the places where we can grow are usually not going to be the same as the places where the loss was experienced for some communities.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We've been doing a lot of work with the city of Portland looking at specifically that question, which is to say, you know, which communities have most adversely been impacted? Because in aggregate, that's great, but really it's disaggregated impacts that matter. What we've seen is the number of small businesses today is the same as it was pre-pandemic. Certainly the amount of closures of small businesses was staggering. And so many of those entrepreneurs maybe aren't in business today that were previously and haven't recovered those jobs and sources of wealth generation. When you look at the jobs effectively, the only sector that hasn't recovered in aggregate is leisure and hospitality. And so many of those workers in that space have maybe looked to different sectors for growth. But yeah, this is a big question, I think, in understanding, when you think about it through a lens of shared prosperity, the aggregate jobs is less relevant. The total number of small jobs also maybe not that relevant. It's really, where are those challenging places? And I think some of that, the technological and kind of new normal in some of these industries is bearing out. So for example, in leisure and hospitality, the business delivery model in terms of, the labor and how it functioned previously versus what's happening now has changed drastically. And so that has some good and some bad associated with it. But yeah, these are the more difficult and important questions to ask is, not just focusing on the aggregate for sure.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lamb?
Well, my question was pretty much similar to Michael, that I think that before we can attract the business to come back to downtown, we need to identify what kind of services we need to bring back, right? And we can come around to support those services to be successful, then the offices can come back. But I think that's once we identify those, we can all wrap around the support to make it successful. But I think that's the small businesses downtown, in downtown area that closes, that really the key of our region growth and economic. So so helpful to hear your perspective, and thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation and really timely, obviously, given even new data this morning. So we appreciate you coming to talk to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask Antoinette to introduce the next item.
So with this, again, just want to thank Dr. Wilkerson for his comments. And certainly as we think about some of the headwinds that he highlighted, we just wanted to make sure that, again, in our budget development, that we were contemplating that and coming to you all with a proposed budget this morning that is reflective of some of the headwinds that we think we're facing. But I will also comment that if I had to characterize how I'm thinking about this and how we and the finance team are thinking about this from a more long-term perspective and how we are making strategic decisions around investments that impact this budget, but certainly impact the trajectory of where we go as a port. I think I would characterize that as, we took the approach of looking forward. I appreciate Dr. Wilkerson's comments. I think he was definitely spot on. But to me, it also represents an opportunity to acknowledge that and think about how we as the port can play an active role in how we think about allocating our resources so that in the long term, we are at least a part of the process of addressing some of those trends that can ultimately be more favorable in the long term. So I just wanted to say that this budget definitely reflects our thinking around the long-term sustainable growth. What we're going to do today is outline, again, how we're allocating those resources. More importantly, make sure that you all understand that the resource allocation is aligned with where we are strategically and meeting some of those objectives. If we could, please just go to the next slide. So again, just as an overview, I'm going to spend just a couple of seconds here making sure that you understand through this fiscal 24 budget, the proposed budget, where we're aligning on our strategic priorities. Then I will have the great pleasure of turning it over to Fran to kind of walk you through our outlook forecast. We'll talk a little bit about the operating and capital budgets, and then give you all a timeline as to where we go from here after our discussion with the proposed budget. Next slide. So we've highlighted here for you some of the key strategic priorities. And again, I won't be laborious in my comments here in terms of just walking you through each of our strategic objectives here. But I do think it's important to highlight where we focused in this proposed budget. Again, in terms of how we're thinking about looking forward and how we're preparing the port, continue to make investments and decisions for the long-term sustainability of the port. And so we have, as you all know, a very big and exciting capital program and project that will be coming online during our fiscal 24 budget, and then nearing its completion 24 and 25. And you heard a lot today about the concession program in TCOR as part of that project delivery. So with that comes our opportunity to make sure that we are delivering on that best in class and making sure that the staffing is aligned for us to be able to deliver on that and do that in a safe and effective way. The other area that you will see in the budget, as Fran touches on this, is again coming back to this long-term thinking that we have around economic development and building quality jobs. And just really I'll say personally excited about these investments that we're making at T2. I know that a number of you all had an opportunity to see just the development that's taking place there. And I think you can certainly see the future and where we're headed, and making those investments for the good of the region, to be able to deliver on these quality jobs in a shared prosperity and equitable way. Can't say enough about how transformative that is. And again, you'll see that reflected in the budget. We are continuing to advance the movement of goods and services, obviously as a seaport and as an airport. And we will continue to make sure that we are thoughtful and strategic around making sure that we are delivering to the region and doing that in the most cost-effective way, and making sure that as we're allocating resources, we do that so that it's beneficial from a return perspective to the port. And so we'll constantly be evaluating our business lines and what is appropriate for us in terms of resource allocation. And then lastly, I'll just say the importance around what I'm going to characterize as smart organizations. I think smart organizations like the port understand the importance of investing in their people. We have taken on that we will be an organization that is a learning culture. We will be curious. We will be cutting edge. We will be thought leadership in what we do. And we will make sure that our employees and the folks that we work with to drive our agenda are certainly prepared from a learning standpoint. So the last thing I'll say about that is, again, my excitement around the work that the executive team has been doing in the area of succession planning and understanding the importance of building a very strong team and deep bench. And so we are fiscal 24, you will see that we are focused on an executive leadership development program as part of, again, our learning culture. And enough can't be said about our focus, our laser focus and commitment to equity and shared prosperity. And so the resources there, bringing on our chief diversity officer, and the work that I know will be happening in 24 and beyond will definitely be beneficial, not only to the port, but to the region. So with that, I have the pleasure of turning this over to my partner here, Fran, to walk you through the budget, and afterwards we'll be happy to take any questions that you all might have. But before I do that, again, always want to make sure that I highlight and just give thanks to a phenomenal finance team that I have that supports me and does just a tremendous amount of great work to make sure that we bring the best to in front of you and to the port. So I'll turn it over to Fran.
Antoinette. Good morning, commissioners. I think all that is left in the audience is the finance team. So I think everybody else is too hungry and thirsty to stick around for the 24 budget presentation. So if we could go to the next slide. Before we kind of jump into the financials, I want to just touch on the outlook of the aviation and marine business lines. So next slide, we'll start with the aviation business line outlook. So just before jumping into our employment and landed weight forecast, you know, we do continue to see steady growth from the pandemic, you know, but our recovery has slowed a bit. When we were in front of you last April, we were, you know, expecting to kind of be back to pre-COVID levels sometime in calendar year 24. And now we're really kind of looking at probably calendar year 25. So just a few factors that are influencing our forecast. You know, demand for leisure travel remains strong, so that's positive, but it's really business and international travel that continue to lag. That's a challenge. You know, PDX is a strong business market, so and that's one of the reasons that our recovery really kind of lags the national average as well. And then also just the airlines are facing significant headwinds throughout the rest of, you know, this year and into calendar year 24. So I would say this is probably a relatively conservative forecast. So on the employment side, we are forecasting 8.5 million. That's down 14% from our pre-COVID activity levels, but, you know, up 8% compared to where we think we'll end the current fiscal year. On the landed weight side, 12.3 billion pounds, just down 3% compared to our pre-COVID levels, up 13% compared to where we think we'll end this fiscal year. So, but again, it's passenger landed weight that has not recovered. So just the bright spot though, I mean, cargo up 53% from where we were in fiscal 19, and projecting 15% growth over the current fiscal year. And that's important because it's really allowed us to maintain a competitive landing fee in our airfield cost center. I think our landing fee has been relatively flat over the last 3 years, so that's great. Sure.
I'm just curious in terms of that projection, given all the supply chain challenges over the course of the last couple of years in your forecast, while that's grown quite a bit, whether you see pressure there kind of going back the other direction, whether that's considered given that supply chain issues across the base are easing somewhat. So whether that's going to impact your landed weight for cargo.
It's possible. I think we do. Campbell Hill does a lot of our forecasting for employments and landed weight, and I believe they're really kind of looking to sort of see our cargo landed weight get back to sort of more just standard kind of economic based growth in the 3 to 5% range, like calendar year 25. So I don't expect this trend to continue, but
I think to step back and just kind of think about the shifts that Dr. Wilkerson talked about and some of the trends with regard to remote work, how people are moving and traveling and activity in this and the like. And so although I do see some leveling off potentially of cargo, I think there's a portion of this that when we had the pandemic and there has been this shift and that disruption, there will be some permanency, I think, in the way goods moved through, you know, our cargo channel. So although slightly elevated, I think we'll start to see that level off, but I don't know that we go back to the pre-2019 levels. I think we continue to participate in that gain. So if that answers the question.
You know, we've been focusing on what we're seeing in the downtown Portland core and how that impacts port operations. But I think the good news, not for downtown Portland, but the growth in Clark County, those are people that are going to use PDX to fly in and out of for the most part. So hopefully that will help stunt at least some of the losses that we're seeing.
I was curious in the cargo gains, has that been with the consistent set of partners, or have people looked to us to be a solution to some of the disruptions that they've seen? Are we working with additional vendors, or is it a consistent set of carriers?
I mean, a couple of things, and maybe Dan could, it's e-commerce primarily, you know, just kind of shifting with people working from home, right? Ordering a lot of things online. So that's definitely a lot of it. And I would say there's some overflow from Seattle on the cargo side, but okay.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting about PDX relative to SeaTac is that we have room. And we are seeing that PDX is a more attractive gateway for regional cargo. And I do think that's why when Antoinette said we will see a correction post-pandemic, but it's probably not going all the way back to 2019 because we do have room to move cargo, and we have a more, I would say, a more intentional strategy around attracting cargo and being a gateway.
Thank you.
Next slide. So shifting to the business line outlook for our marine operations, key takeaways here, just we are looking at growth across all of our business lines, with the exception of our T6 container yard. When looking at the fiscal 24 budget compared to the fiscal year 23 projection. So maybe just to orient folks to all of these charts, the bar on the left, the light blue bar, that's sort of historical actuals, 4-year average. The gray bar in the middle is our current fiscal year projection. And then the bright blue bar on the right is the fiscal 24 proposed budget. So both vessel and intermodal rail volumes, rail container moves are forecasted to decrease in fiscal year 24. This is really reflective of the trend for all West Coast ports right now. Kind of a combination of, volumes are down for West Coast ports for a combination of just, right, we have the unresolved labor talks between the PMA and the ILWU, but also just overall reduced maritime trade with China. So it's, I'm not going to really opine on how long this trend is going to stick around, but that's definitely a factor.
Just can we, sorry.
Yes.
Commissioner Luther. Thank you. Just a question about in the budget, I understand that we're considering our options for T6 and kind of what the future holds, but I'm curious if the budget includes marketing campaigns or any double down efforts around that area as well, and to what degree that kind of investment is reflected in the budget.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So in terms of marketing campaigns and how we get there, not reflected in the budget, what is reflected in this fiscal 24 budget is the way we thought about the business model around revenues, what we could do there, and expenses, and in terms of controlling expenses. So there is, we are projecting in the budget that we will be able to have some better pricing of the movement of some of our containers, particularly on the rail side. So that's also contemplated. What we've also contemplated in the budget is ways in which we can be a little more efficient around the manning of the gate on the terminal to be able to manage some of the costs down. So you will see that. The last thing I'll say is that I think it is going to be important for us and for you all to understand before we go out and have additional resources towards any marketing, we need to be very clear about strategically where we're going. And so we, as an executive team, are certainly still thinking that through and putting a plan together that will lay out kind of what that should look like over the next, I'll say, 12 to 24 months, but certainly impacting this budget. So that needs to be clear as well. But we did do the work around some of the tactical things that we could do to course correct on that.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. Does any of that include any significant capital investments in that T6?
Yeah. Go ahead.
We do when we do actually have in the general fund capital budget. We are making some investments at Terminal 6. There's some lighting and paving work that's happening to actually allow for capacity expansion. So we have a Connect Oregon grant and MARAD PIDP grant reflected in the fiscal 24 budget, and of course the port's match for those projects. So those investments are reflected in our capital budget. Okay, so moving on to our other 3 lines of business on grain bulk at our Terminal 5. We are looking at an increase of about 47% to 2 million metric tons. So while that is, growth over our current fiscal year, it is worth pointing out that that is, significantly less volume than we've done historically, as we just continue to see that operator route more cargo through their Kalama elevator. And we've seen several months throughout the last few fiscal years where their facility has just been non-operational. So we're really that's in this forecast. So just on the mineral bulk side, volumes projected to increase almost 20% to 7.2 million metric tons. That's nearly all driven by Canpotex's potash volumes at their Terminal 5 facility. We're forecasting 4 million metric tons, which is also their minimum annual guarantee. So revenues will be at that 4 million metric ton level, regardless of if they do less than that. And then on the auto side, this is actually really exciting news. We're looking at, 17% growth over the current fiscal year with AWC at their T6 facility. We've secured new GM volumes that are coming through that facility now in the current fiscal year. So that's great news for the auto line of business. And we're seeing, you'll see kind of in the marine financial summary that's definite improvement for the bottom line. Next slide. So looking at our FTE positions in the fiscal 24 budget, I'll focus mostly just on the 2 areas where we're adding FTE. So for PDX, we are looking at adding about 17 positions. It's an increase of 4%. Most of the additions are really frontline staff in maintenance, airport operations, and public safety and security. But we also have a couple of additions in PDX that are really focused on the new concessions program that you heard about earlier. So, you saw all of the new operations that are going to be there. So that's a lot of new leases that need to be managed. And there's also quite a bit of T-Core construction impacts that need to be managed. So those are really the focus of the PDX FTE additions. On the support services side, we're looking at an increase of about 11 positions, 4%, with additions really in key strategic areas like engineering. We have kind of a growing capital project portfolio, but also kind of building out our new shared prosperity office, Myra's team, and government relations and corporate communications. Next slide. Okay, PDX financials. I'm going to skip right to the bottom. We really focus on sort of 2 key metrics, and the airline cost center net requirement forecast at almost 180 million. It's an increase of about 32 million or 21%. Two primary drivers, debt service and coverage associated with TCOR. That's all coming online now. And then, of course, operating expense growth is another key contributor to the increase in the airline cost center net requirement. I should actually take a step back, though, and just mention the airline cost center net requirement. It's effectively what the airlines owe the port for operating, the terminal and the airfield, and we charge them in the form of terminal rents and landing fees. On the operating expense growth, just the real drivers of the growth there are, living wage increases for our major service contracts like custodial, our busing and parking management contract. We also have quite a bit in here allocated for the PDX master planning effort, which is underway, and also just the FTE additions and inflation. For port cost center income, that's for all of our, the port's assets like the parking garages and roadways. We really look at this metric. It's a pay-as-you-go. It's pay-as-you-go funding source for capital projects, so indicative of our liquidity position on the port cost center side. So fiscal 24 proposed budget at 60 million. So while it looks like a decrease of 3 million, it is a decrease of 3 million, 5%. If you exclude the American Rescue Plan Act funding that is included in the port cost center income in both of these fiscal years, there's just a difference in how we're allocating those funds between these two fiscal years. Port cost center income is actually a little over 20 million better than what we had in the fiscal 23 adopted budget. So that's largely a result of improvement in non-airline revenues, which you see kind of near the top of the table. And almost all of that is in parking. But we are seeing other non-airline revenue streams improving over current fiscal year as well. It's not just parking that's doing well. Next slide. In the general fund financial summary, I'll focus here really just on marine and trade and equitable development as they generate most of the revenues. So marine and trade and equitable developments combined operating income before depreciation in the fiscal 24 budget is a loss of about $1 million. So that's almost $500,000 or 90% worse than what was in the fiscal year 23 adopted budget. So I'll kind of break that down between both Marine and TED. So Marine's contribution to that 1 million loss, their positive income of 1.3 million. However, it's moving in the wrong direction. It's about 2 million or 60% worse than what was in fiscal 23's budget. And the biggest drag there is our T6 container yard financial performance. It's deteriorating over last year with the loss of BNSF contributing to a lot of our fixed costs at Terminal 6. We're losing some of our higher margin business that we had in the current fiscal year, like the 53-foot containers and some of the charter vessels. And then we also just have increasing longshore labor costs and not a lot of flexibility to adjust rates on the vessel side of operations. But, there is still good news, as I mentioned in the marine business line outlook. The auto financial performance is helping mitigate some of the losses on the container side with the new GM volumes. The auto line of business is about 2.5 million better than fiscal 23. And I think Keith would say that we're too conservative on our volume projection for autos. And then moving on to TED, our operating income before depreciation, it's a loss of 2.1 million. So, we're not at break even here, but we're moving in the right direction. It's 1.4 million or 40% better than our current fiscal year budget. And this is really where I think you see, at least tangibly, our strategic investments in shared prosperity and economic development. We've got a lot of funding set aside for, Terminal 2 site development, both on the operating and capital side for the Mass Timber and Housing Innovation Campus. and also just developing a strategy for optimizing our assets in East County. And it's just exciting to, part of the reason TED's financial performance is improving. We have new lease revenues in this budget out at T2 with Monomi, leasing one of the existing warehouses out there.
Yeah. So is there something in the medium to longer term that replaces the loss of rail operations that changes the outlook?
Hey, Commissioner, I'll take a stab at that. Right now, and going back to Commissioner Luther's comment, we're working hard with the different carriers on rate setting and also volumes and potential new service. So that certainly is a pathway. Whether that's a long-term solution to mitigate the loss is yet to be seen, but that's certainly the direction we're headed into that in terms of the operating cost of the T6.
Okay. And at least as I understand it, it's the kind of intermodal services that make it more attractive. And in terms of making the marine port more attractive, we require the railway to be there and do the kind of matchmaking. One, is that a correct understanding? Two, is there something we should be doing in terms of medium to long term to have a healthy kind of intermodal operation?
The answer to your first question is yes, it makes it more attractive, but it's not necessarily required. The T6 has operated, for 50 years or so. It hasn't really had intermodal service over the last 20 years. So the growth of intermodal service, rail connections to the Midwest, is relatively new. It occurred a long time ago, and that can be profitable if the pricing, matches the operational cost. So that does make it attractive. But one of our carriers, for example, MSC, calls and just serves the regional market. The regional market health is the most important factor for T6 and its future. Is what are the imports and exports that Oregon depends on, and can T6 be competitive to provide those as opposed to alternative gateways? So yes, we're focused on intermodal, but the truth is the most important thing is the regional market and the cost differential between moving that cargo through other gateways like Puget Sound or Oakland versus T6. And that is our primary focus. The intermodal is great as long as it can pay for itself as well. That does provide some benefit for certain carriers, but not all.
Thanks.
Commissioner Luther?
In prior meetings, we've talked about some opportunities in terms of some infrastructure investments, government grant, and that kind of thing. I'm just curious, outside of this budget, whether there are other eyes on the prize, if you will, if there are areas where you're hoping would supplement the budget but not necessarily included, or maybe if there are assumptions. I wouldn't think so, but I could just get some thoughts around
Probably
that.
a number of us who can answer the question, but in short, we're interested, but the match is a problem if the operating budget isn't in the black. So if our numbers are in the red, it doesn't make any sense to go out and search for federal dollars as an example. We do have one project currently out there that's using federal dollars that includes a port match, but we're essentially in a holding pattern right now, waiting to see if we can get the commercial terms to work out so that we have positive cash flow that could fund something like that. So potential is out there, but we're not pursuing any of that right now.
Commissioner Luther, the only other thing that I will add to that is we think about it from a funding perspective and a capital allocation perspective. It's also important for us to examine the extent to which we're using some of this capital when we do get the grants that leverages a better opportunity for us. It's got to either do one of two things: help us improve our revenue posture, or it has to be an investment, in my mind, an investment that's made that gets us more efficient so that we can address maybe cost reduction or have the opportunity for cost reduction. So when you look at it from that standpoint, particularly on a return on invested capital, then you can start to think about, are we making the right capital allocation decisions? And are we getting the right appropriate return for doing so? So
I'm curious to hear how many jobs could be impacted to change at the marine terminal.
Well, when we talk about change at the marine terminal, there's no immediate change at the marine terminal. I do note that I recently did a research piece with the port staff and the ILW and PMA that we added, Stuart, maybe you can correct me, 30 to 50 jobs with the increase of container traffic at T6. Clearly, waterfront labor jobs are high quality blue collar jobs in terms of pay and benefits. And that idea of shared prosperity and the value to the community, not just to the shippers, to give them options and maybe cost advantages of other gateways, but the labor force out there is one of our highest concerns as we think about our future at T6.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, next slide. Next slide. So I think everybody knows, just for our aviation capital program, the real focus these next couple of years, and specifically in fiscal year 24, is just delivering on the terminal core and western expansion. So in this fiscal 24 proposed budget, we have total capital expenditures of $390 million. And then between terminal core western expansion and the Zebra expansion project, those two make up about $310 million. Next slide. Next, okay. And then our general fund capital program, fiscal year 24 total capital expenditures are $80 million, which is actually, you know, if you're kind of looking at historical budget books, which I'm sure you all do, just, you know, with your morning coffee, that's actually a pretty big number, but 30 million of that is funded through either grants or loans. And just a couple of the highlights of projects in this budget. We still have our two major capital projects out at our Hillsborough General Aviation Airport going on, the taxiway A rehab and runway safety area improvements. Those total about $21 million. I think substantial completion in fiscal year 24 for the runway safety area improvement project, and maybe 25 for taxiway A. And then of course, you know, the Terminal 2 innovation campus, like deep soil mixing improvements. We have about 10 million in this fiscal 24 budget for that. And also some navigation equipment, and that will be loan funded. And next slide, we're at the end. So just here's just kind of a review of key milestones, as we'll be before you a couple of times over the next couple of months. So obviously today, public hearing on our proposed budget. On May 10th, we will be back before you to request approval to submit our budget to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission for ensuring compliance with local budget law. And then on June 14th, staff and commissioners will meet with the TSCC and they'll conduct their public hearing on our budget. And then sometime in the last week of June, we'll formally request that the commission adopt our fiscal 24 budget.
Thank you both for the presentation and for the written materials. I have to say I did geek out a little bit on the written materials. I really liked the resources and requirements sort of presentation. It identifies that there's no magic money, right? There's no magic money, and it makes one sit up and pay attention to the challenges before us in terms of financial costs. So appreciate that. And I think it really led to this rich discussion we've had so far today. Want to open up for questions or comments. We don't have a decision today, but if there are any additional comments, go ahead, Commissioner Kova.
I just want to say it's never fun to be faced with a budget shortfall, and it's really hard on staff, and especially having gone through the last 3 years and trying to survive COVID for everyone involved. So I have a lot of empathy for all of you. I have also found over time that when you have a budget shortfall, the ability to really come together and crystallize what are your priorities, where are we going, it does, once you get through it, put you on better footing. It's just no fun going through it. So just a huge thank you to all of you when you get hit with that news and you're like, oh, here we go again. You're not alone. You'll get through it. Things will be better with time. So hang in there.
Commissioner Koba, I just want to say thank you for that. We don't hear that enough, but we'll certainly soak it up today. And I think the other thing that I'll say is, we, again, just have a phenomenal executive team that is really laser focused on some of the questions that you all teased out today of what is important strategically. So if I go back to the first, not in the presentation, but just the first slide around advancing goods and services, where we highlighted for you all that we're evaluating operating models just to make sure that we can come back to you with some additional clarity around what's going to be best financially for the organization. The decisions that we make today undoubtedly will put us on the path that we want to be on in terms of financial sustainability for the next generation and the next generation. And again, underscore, do that in a sustainable way where it's shared and equitable for, the region. So I think that's the most important thing. But thank you for the questions because it helps us. It really does.
Thank you. So we'll open a public hearing and ask if there's a member of the public that has or wishes to comment on the Port's proposed budget. Okay, hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. No action is required at this time. The budget will be back before the Commission for action at the May 10th meeting. Thank you very much, and our meeting's adjourned. Thank you.